All right, welcome everyone to this 2-hour segment on the Divine Feminine, led by Melissa, Jackie, and Myra. Welcome, ladies. Please take it away and introduce our special guest. Go for it.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Will. I have your book here, which you were reading. Thank you so much for all your beautiful work. We're so thrilled to have you here to share with us your wisdom, research, and heart. So I'm going to pass it over to Jackie. She's been in communication with you. And thank you for being here with us.
Great.
Jackie.
Thank you all for setting this up.
Hi, Will. Thank you so much again for joining us. This is such an honor. It's a privilege. We started the Divine Feminine a few weeks ago, and we defined it as the role of the Divine Feminine is to foster inner wisdom, nurture the soul, cultivate an environment for growth and exploration, and guide in the soul's evolution and form. And so we invited you this week to discuss the Divine Feminine. I've been getting a lot of questions, about really to help us explain what is the Divine Feminine, the concept of Sophia from your writing and your knowledge and your wisdom, and also the consequences of the social injustices that manifest from the oppression of the feminine.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jackie, and thanks everyone for joining. And I'm glad that this is being recorded also, so that other people, I guess, can listen later as well. And so I think, the underlying idea, of course, in all of this, from my point of view anyway, of discussion of the sacred feminine, is first of all that what we are as human beings is not our physical body. Our physical body is a vehicle that we employ in some way for the short time we're on this planet. But what we are essentially is eternal consciousness that was never born and will never die. We're focused in a certain reality, but that's just, in a sense, a fraction of our true nature. So feminine and masculine are dimensions of awareness and ways of being. And so the divine, I think there's a sense of divine or pure masculine and feminine that we have as templates and as potentials for us as human beings, whether we're in a male body or a female body. That will, of course, influence us in our expression through the physical world. But the underlying idea is that we're all born into a culture that's organized at its core around herding animals, routinely and relentlessly imprisoning and horribly abusing literally millions of animals every day. I mean, really every minute when you include marine animals. So this is a massive, not only an outer action, but a massive internal action. In other words, we're born into a society where we're eating the foods of meat, dairy products, and eggs, along with everything else. But that's the core inside program of our society, is eating these foods and participating in paying for the sexual abuse of animals and the killing of their freedom, their purposes, and stealing the babies from the mothers. I mean, this is really very intense. It's kind of an intense topic to talk about early in the morning, but anyway, this is what's going on. So this is at a very deep level an assault on the feminine. Animal agriculture is an assault on the feminine primarily. Animals are also terribly harmed, but you couldn't have animal agriculture without the complete and systematic domination and repression of mothers giving birth to babies, nursing those babies, nurturing those babies. And so at the core of our culture is human beings saying, no, I'm going to stab you. I'm going to stab your baby. I'm going to steal your baby, stab your baby, and then impregnate you again on the rape rack, and then steal your baby again, and then eventually kill you. So you can't get more violent and brutal in terms of what we do routinely and relentlessly in this society. And so it dumbs us down at such a deep level. Unfortunately, we don't realize it. You don't realize, that old saying, you don't know what you don't know, right? We don't know how dumbed down we are by this. I mean, there's no way to really know because our whole society is doing this. So this is the situation that we're born into. It's not our fault. No one is to blame in a sense. I mean, this has been going on, as I described, in the World Peace Diet for 10,000 years. So over the last 10,000 years as this patriarchal, warlike society that seemed to emerge in the Middle Eastern Levant area, the Eastern Mediterranean region, has spread globally. We're all born into it. We're all born into very well-meaning parents and relatives and friends and neighbors and ministers and everybody, teachers, doctors, telling us from the time we're born, from the time we're in the womb, really, that we need to eat the flesh and secretions of horribly abused animals. And so we're just doing that, right? And that is not just harming us physically, as we understand. And we can talk, a lot, of course, about the tremendous harm this does to our physical health. And the whole pandemic right now, in many ways, is just one of many examples of this. But the epidemic of heart disease and cancer and liver disease and kidney disease and obesity and diabetes and all this and hunger, just the hunger. I mean, the fact that we're feeding most of the grain that we're growing to animals while people starve. 30, they say now about at least 30,000. Recent estimates are up to 40 or 50,000 people every day starving, which is completely unnecessary in the sense that we're growing plenty of food to feed everyone. So all of this, these epidemics, in a sense, of violence and disease in our society, and the chronic war and so forth, and injustice, I think stem essentially from the repression of the sacred feminine, which is the core of animal agriculture, is not just killing the animals, but also sexually abusing them and stealing their babies. So that's the real feminine, loving, nurturing, caring core of our consciousness, I think, of mammalian consciousness, not just mammalian consciousness, but really, birds, really most of I'd say virtually all the animals, we see this in them, this loving and caring for their offspring. And so this is such a wound, such a deep wound that everyone has. And so we end up creating institutions that are a reflection of this. They're authoritarian, they're competitive, they're hierarchical. The feminine dimension, that which is receptive essentially to a higher wisdom, gets suppressed. So this is a huge subject. I'm just talking now about the sort of the outer level of this, what happens in our society, the violence towards the feminine in animals, in cows and pigs and chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, fishes also. I've been to these places where they have fish operations and hatcheries and things, and these poor females, they come through and they slam them and they squirt all the eggs everywhere, and then they pregnate on the eggs with other, it's just all very violent in order to maximize profits and maximize, see these animals as just like objects to be used in a technocratic way. So this is the underlying dilemma, really, that we're born into this, and yet we naturally yearn for equality and justice and freedom and joy and harmony and peace and so forth in our lives and in our relationships with each other. And yet the underlying foundation, the bedrock of our society, is destroying that for others, right? It's destroying it for these other females and males, for other living beings, and for human beings. The human beings that are born with less privilege, right? They get really abused. They're not able to compete, and so they're suffering too. So this might makes right kind of society where the strong dominate and exploit the weak, because that's what animal agriculture is. It's the strong dominating and exploiting the weak. So this is the template that we keep repeating. So the feminine, just to kind of tie this into the spiritual dimension and cultural dimension, is the capacity to be receptive. If you study in depth some of the traditions that go into these things, like, for example, the yin and yang tradition in China, where there's this whole sort of metaphysical system where we understand the entire universe as the interplay of these two primary forces of yin and yang. And it's very fascinating to see that, from the primordial essence, this fundamental, so a dualism sort of emerged. And we can see that, modern physics talks about positive and negative spins on electrons and so forth, and protons and neutrons. But then but the underlying idea is we have this sort of underlying sort of dualism, and then it plays out in all kinds of ways. And so the yang is more the yin is more active. So it's in eternal consciousness. We have the capacity to act, to create. That's incredibly important, powerful. But the other aspect we have is the capacity to receive, to connect, and to open. So the whole idea is that these two support each other. The creative yang energy of expression cannot function without a healthy yin receptivity that opens to a higher dimension and brings inspiration. So we need both, right? All of you, if you have any kind of creative expression, right? If you, like I play the piano, Madeline's an artist, I'm sure I know a lot of you are creative. So I know for me, if I'm writing a poem or if I'm creating, it's so important to be able to quiet the mind and not be, overly thinking, and open to something that comes from in a sense, a higher dimension within myself, and then to give that some kind of form. And so this, I think, is something we all know, and I've talked about this quite a bit, and like in social justice issues is a great example. I think Mahatma Gandhi, was pretty well known for being a great social genius in a sense. I mean, bringing social justice really to a lot of people and working for liberation of people, but also for being very serious in his spiritual path, right? And so just as one example, he was really in a situation when the British imposed the salt tax. That was a huge dilemma for the people of India. And they all came running to him, right? They came to Gandhiji, what do we do? The British have now imposed a tax on salt. We can't pay it. We're going to, this is going to crush us. And instead of just responding, he said, I need to go and meditate about this. And so he went into his little cabin, and he sat there, and he said, I'll tell you tomorrow. And after a day of meditating, they all knocked on the door and said, okay, now what do we do? How do we respond to this outrage by the British? And he said, I'm not sure. I need more time. And so he took another couple of days, and they banged on the door again. They said, now what do we do? And he said, I don't know yet. Give me some more time. So finally, after another few more days, he came out, and he said, all right, I know what to do. We will march to the sea, and we will make our own salt together. And so to me, that's a nice example, in a sense, of a very powerful yin. Like he really took time to not do anything, to just tune in, to be receptive, to connect with the sacred feminine dimension of wisdom internally, and not just react, but really connect. And then out of that powerful yin came a very powerful yang. And then you had hundreds of thousands of people marching to the ocean and making their own salt. And people say that was the thing that really kind of ended the British capacity in India. So, but the underlying idea is that this is something that everyone understands on some level. That as we, like I found, if I go into nature for a few days and just immerse myself in the beauty of nature, that I very often get ideas that then become another book or a CD or whatever, or something, or a poem. But I mean, we get inert, so we need to learn to nurture this capacity to be receptive. This is the sacred feminine dimension. One aspect of the sacred feminine dimension is the receptivity, which comes when the mind is quiet, instead of being completely overrun by the cultural program and the thoughts that are product, in many ways, of the cultural program. And then the sacred masculine is the capacity to then bring this into some kind of a form. The feminine is also, of course, the nurturing, loving, caring dimension that women, I think, obviously have this embodied, I think, at a deeper level, perhaps, than men, in the sense that when a mother gives birth to a little baby, there's really objectively just a lot of trouble. This little baby is getting up in the middle of the night all the time. She doesn't get paid extra or anything, and yet she just devotes herself. I mean, that fundamental, natural, beautiful, I'll give my life for my little being and do whatever it takes. That's the foundation of a healthy society. Right? If we don't have that, if we as little kids did not get that kind of sacred feminine caring on some level, then we're going to be wounded by that. And so that's the foundation of healthy psychology and spirituality and culture and everything. And again, animal agriculture is an attack on that. And so we can go, more. I think, what we see, of course, happening today is this attack is playing out, I think, in many ways. We see more and more the feminine dimension of life is being pushed to the side. We have this more technocratic approach to life. Women are not allowed to be part of the birthing process very often. So, the way we do birth in our society in many ways is like a factory farm. I own you, I own your baby. I'll just do, you do it how I tell you to do it, and so forth. So we see really, I think, a tremendous challenge that we face in our society today is really the two levels, right? One is that each one of us is an individual expression of consciousness, that we nurture the sacred feminine dimension of wisdom. Essentially, Sophia means wisdom. Sophia, Jacqueline mentioned that. So I talk about this in the World Peace Diet. Sophia is the ancient Greek word for wisdom. It literally means wisdom, Sophia, but it's feminine word, and it's this idea that we have within us, all of us as human beings, this capacity for wisdom. And wisdom is intuition. It's an inner knowing. It's not just knowledge. It's not just something you accumulate from outside. Wisdom is the most precious. Remember in the Old Testament when Solomon can have anything, and he says more important than anything is wisdom, because wisdom is the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of joy, of peace, of harmony, of love, of abundance, awareness, creativity. Wisdom is really the essential ingredient for happiness. And this is the sacred feminine dimension of intuitive awareness, where we learn to connect with an internal guidance system that we can trust, right? That there's nothing more precious in our life for any human being than an internal guidance system that we can learn to connect with, that'll help us live our unique life. So what this is, essentially, Sophia, is this internal guidance system, this inner intuitive knowing, which doesn't mean that our life will be easy. There's going to be challenges, but it means that we're going to live authentically. That's the key. We'll live our life. We won't live somebody else's life. We won't be trying to please somebody else and do what my father or my mother or what the Walmart ads say I should be doing. Yeah, the whole idea is that this feminine wisdom gives us the guidance to live our unique life and to question whatever's being said in the media. That's why I think most people who go vegan, it's that inner wisdom, the sacred feminine wisdom that rises up in us and says, I'm not going to pay for the abuse of animals, female animals and children, but also I'm going to trust myself to decide what food is right for me, rather than just going along with what everybody says, right? That's what wisdom is. It's an internal guidance system. It's not dependent on what everybody else says. It's our own inner guidance system. So the sacred feminine has this element, I think, of liberation, and also I think of fierceness, in the sense of I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect the earth, to protect my children, to live my life authentically. I'm not just going to allow everything to be destroyed, or myself or my life to be destroyed, or my children to be destroyed, or my own authenticity to be destroyed. So this feminine wisdom, it has many dimensions. I think it has a lot of ways that it brings healing and clarity into our lives in a daily basis. Not just our food, but how we communicate, how we live, what kind of communities we can create together. I think, like right now, this is a beautiful manifestation in many ways of the sacred feminine wisdom, where we're gathering together, even though we're doing it through a sort of a high-tech way, but it's to share ideas and get inspiration from each other, not just on the level of thoughts and concepts, but on the level of deeper understanding. All right, so I'm going to stop there. That's just sort of a foundation. I'd love to hear. I'm not sure how this is supposed to go. If it's like we all just talk now or what, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to somebody. Thanks.
So much, Will. So normally, what we do if you've completed, saying what you wanted to share right now, we kind of open it up to conversation, and we usually raise our hands, or there's a way you can indicate it through your technology as well, raised hand, and then we moderate that. Sounds like you'd like to open it up for comments or questions. And we do thumbs up, or this is a hand clap in the air.
Oh, okay.
It means
Right.
you're awesome. We love what you're saying. Just you get all the code.
Okay, thanks.
With the kids, what I do is thumbs up means I'm happy, or I get it. Thumbs down means I'm really miserable and I don't understand something. So
Right, clarify.
and then hands up, of course, for questions. So
And this is silent applause.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like this. Okay.
It's a shimmering hands. I think
Shimmering
it's
hands.
sign
Right.
language. It's a clap in the air. So,
Right.
great. Thank you so much. I would love to comment, if you don't mind first. I wrote some things down just based on what you were expressing there. And one of the things that I'm an artist and an arts educator, and one of the things I focus on a lot is passing on wisdom through stories and through my creative gifts. And what you're talking about makes really great sense, of course, but many people haven't been taught this, and they don't know how to access that inner voice. They don't know how to access the divine feminine. And in fact, I don't know if they even know what an authentic self is. So for us who are up to speed, I'll put it like that, we get it. But what do we do with the general masses who, their family, and some of you know this story, one of our neighbors, their 13-year-old shot and killed a raccoon. It did not need to happen. And when I confronted them, they now won't speak to me. And then the child came down the street because his consciousness had been tweaked by my perspective. And he came to engage in a conversation with me about, well, I'd like to know about your perspective. But inevitably, this child goes home to a family who are hunters. They kill. They're into normalized violence, not normalized nonviolence. So how do we change this mindset, Or I don't want to say how do we change this mindset. How does this mindset get changed? How does it get educated to have a sensitive and a different understanding, and therefore act differently? That was one thing. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, so I've been part of the Haida Nation. Haida are from Alaska, and I carved canoes with a Haida master canoe carver for 14 years. And so I have lived very close to their spiritual wisdom, their oral traditions, etc. And they're a community family, and they pass on to their children. They include their children in everything, and they pass to their children through oral tradition, that storytelling, their connection to Mother Earth, their connection to their ancestors, and to traditional ways of living on the planet that do not hurt the planet, do not hurt Mother Earth. And we have a disconnect as a community living the divine feminine. So we have the issue or problem of, as individuals, how do we get to that inner wisdom? What does it look like? And then what do we do with it? Because all our lives we've been taught something else. And how do we collectively come to that?
Yes. Yeah, I think the word that kind of is a critical word in all of this is the word community. That's, I think, the key word, because the reason that we are the way we are in many ways is because of the communities we're born into and we're raised in. So that, like that in that example you gave of that young boy that killed the raccoon, he's born into like you said, he's born into a community where violence is normalized towards animals and encouraged. And he doesn't really have a choice in many ways. It's very difficult. I was the same way. Probably you can all relate to that. I was eating a lot of meat, dairy products, and eggs. I love bacon. I was eating all this because my mother gave it. There was no other choice. This was back in the 1950s. So I think to answer your first question, or maybe not answer it, but to respond to it, I think the most powerful way that we can help change our society and individuals in the society is to do the best we can as individuals to foster and create communities of sanity and kindness and caring. There's this underlying idea, I guess, in the Buddhist tradition, for example, There's a Noble Eightfold Path, and that means, the idea is that there's these 8 things you can do that will lead to enlightenment. There's right, different, right livelihood, right speech, right action, right mindfulness. Those 8, I could list them off, but the basic idea is that there's a 9th one that sort of underlies all of those. That's essential to all of them, and without the 9th one, it's hard to make anything work. And that's right association. Basically, we become like the people we hang out with. And that's really important to understand. We really, we're, as human beings, we are extremely telepathic, and we tune into social cues and everything. We really become like the people we're around. And so that's why very often there's communities, like most religious traditions have monasteries, or they have some kind of a system where people who really want to just cultivate spirituality can kind of support each other in doing that in some way. And we have, I think, in our society today, we have a problem because our communities are so fragmented. Number one, there's more individuals feel more and more like they're just lone units of production in the heartless economic system. We're all on our own, and we're competing with each other. And there isn't really, like you're talking about with the Haida people, this sense of honoring the elders. Elders are kind of shunted away, and we're kind of embarrassed about them. They're kind of narrow-minded, old, stupid people. We want to get them out there, get them out of the way, get rid of them. And young kids are often also not really respected. Unfortunately, they're expensive. There's all kinds of trouble with having, with kids and education, and so there's the community, the sense of community in our society today. I think part of it's because of capitalism. You used to have a system that reduces everything to money, and of course, you have animal agriculture is basically the foundation of capitalism. So, in an animal agriculture society where everything is reduced to objects, the only way out of that I can see is for individuals, because the only power I can't change anybody else, right? I can't, I can't do that. I can't change another person. I can change this one. I can change myself, this expression. But and out of that, I can hopefully develop the sacred feminine wisdom to be effective in helping others, helping heal others, or helping but I can't heal others if I don't heal myself. So I think one of the most healing things we can do is to help create communities that encourage people to question the official narratives in their society. So, like in your example, I think with that boy, you were that community. You're the community who basically provided some feedback to help him as an individual to heal on some level a wound. And of course, he's going to get other input from his family and so forth. But still, that's beautiful. And I think what we're doing now, especially in this time of social distancing, we're seeing more and more people. We have to create online communities. Somehow, we have, as human beings, we just this urge to create communities, because that's how we get our identity and our meaning. The meaning in our life really comes through our communities that we're a part of. And so it's very important for us. So I think anything we can do, basically, to help create communities of kindness, respect, and sanity will be a tremendous step forward in our society, however that is. However those communities, like if they're online communities like this, if they're like vegan restaurants or actual communities, like people know the story, it's in the World Peace Diet. I was just eating meat when for a few weeks, I was in this vegan community in Tennessee called The Farm, a bunch of hippies. And that was it. I never ate meat in my life because of their example. This really works. I was in it. I saw what they were eating. I said, "Why are you doing it?" They explained it to me, and I was like, that was it. I'm not eating. That was 45 years ago. I've never eaten meat in my life since being in that community for a few weeks. And so to me, it's very clear. And when I was a Zen Buddhist monk living in a monastery in Korea, I was for the second time in my life in a vegan community. And it just deepened it so much, because we were meditating every day for 12 hours a day, whatever it was. And so there was this, and they had been practicing veganism for about 750 years. So I had this living experience of being in a community that had been practicing vegan living for 750 years, you know, and it was just in the way we did things. It was in the respect, the way we ate, how we never wasted any food, how we, you know, bowed. There was this whole feeling of kindness and respect and ahimsa, nonviolence, and the way the way the community did things, just the way we conducted ourselves. And there was such a sense of being embedded in a community. You're an individual, but the individual really is part of a community. It was a real culture shock to come back to the United States later and just have this visceral feeling of how we're all individuals. There's really, community is kind of like, it's so different here. I mean, we just kind of do our own thing. And so it creates a certain freedom, but I think also a lot of insecurity in people. And so I think we're trying to find ways to create communities that will help educate everyone and bring forth the sacred feminine, and find ways to do that are creative. You know, that's basically it. It's I would love to see, for example, more land-based communities where people can go like the farm was. You know, there was that great time back in the 70s when it was the Back to the Land movement. There was a lot of hippie communes out there people were going to, and I think it really did do a lot of positive things for people. But of course, the system, the banks hated it. The medical industry hated it. The government didn't like it. You know, the whole system is kind of set up to discourage people.
Oh, Will, looks like you froze there. Hopefully it's momentary. Meanwhile, go ahead, sweetie.
Yeah. So, Melvin, you have your hand up. Do you want to, we could either wait for Will to come back, or you're on mute, Melvin. Let's see, I'm going to unmute you. I unmuted you. Did I unmute?
Oh, I think you guys probably did it at the same time.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to be a help. And I'm being a hindrance. Oh,
okay,
no.
Melvin, okay, we're not going to mess with your mute button. Can you unmute yourself? No, you're muted. No, now try. Now try, Melvin. Melvin?
Okay.
Yeah. We can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm just here for the ride, checking out, listening. And if my hand went up, I probably was, you know, itching or something.
Hello,
Can you hear
Melvin.
me well now? Hello, everyone.
Great
Yeah.
to see you. We're so
Likewise.
I have a question while Will is not here, and it's been great so far. Bibi, what was the name of that group that you said that you were talking about? It sounded really wonderful, but I didn't catch the name of the group.
Who was that question to, Rebecca? Sorry.
I said Bibi, but it's to you.
It's
I'm
to
sorry.
me. And
Yes.
are you, we're talking about the Haida, Haida, the Haida Nation. They're a Native American Alaskan tribe from British Columbia, Haida Gwaii. They are renowned canoe carvers. So there are three main tribes up in Alaska: Tsimshian, Tlingit, and Haida. Yeah, Jackie, I'm just wondering can you text or contact Will just to see if he needs help getting back.
Yeah, I was just doing that right now.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and Myra, you also had a question. Did you want to go ahead and talk now, or did you want to wait till Will's back?
He's back.
Will is back.
He
Okay.
is back.
All right. Welcome back. We're so glad you're back. Okay. Yay. Myra, did you want your hands up? Why don't you go ahead, sweetie?
Yes. Well, hi everyone. I bought the book of Will Tuttle when we had the opportunity of meeting him last year, and according to what we're talking of how to bring community together and how to bring more consciousness, one of the paragraphs that got my attention, and I believe it's a whole chapter, but I would like, because I got this book in Spanish, but I would like to see if there's an opportunity that Dr. Will Tuttle could share with us. It's right on page 17, and it's the chapter where it talks about love is to understand. So if you can just share that paragraph on that page, I would love to, because that's one of the paragraphs that really touched my heart and that got me motivated to read the entire book.
Will, you're on mute. You're on. There you go.
That's is that 17 of the Spanish edition? I guess it is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Page 15 in your English edition.
page 15. Yeah. Right. Well, yes, I think that when I was young, I often wondered if our culture really had to be like this. I've discovered that it does not. We can all make a most profound contribution to cultural transformation and world peace with our meals, which are our most vital connection to our culture and to the natural world. Making the effort to cultivate our awareness and see beyond the powerful acculturation we endured brings understanding. Healing, grace, and freedom come from understanding. Love understands. From understanding, we can embrace our responsibility and become a force for blessing the world with our lives rather than perpetuating disconnectedness and cruelty by proxy. With awareness, our behavior naturally changes, and individual changes in behavior, rippling through the web of relationships, can lead to social transformation and bring new dimensions of freedom, joy, and creativity to everyone. It all begins with our most intimate and far-reaching connection with the natural order, our most primary spiritual symbol, and our most fundamental social ritual, eating. Yeah, so I think that's such an important point for me anyway, that the idea that love is understanding. If we want to understand anything, we can only understand it through love. We can't understand it. This sort of this approach in materialistic science of trying to understand by analysis. I'm going to understand the frog by cutting the frog open. It's like we get a certain kind of understanding, but it's not the real understanding. The feminine, it's sort of this perverse masculine. It's not even masculine understanding. It's sort of a very perverse, wounded view of the world where we kill something to understand it. And we see this. We see it. We see this everywhere. I mean, this is it's kind of this warlike mentality that we're opposed to nature. And I think that's really the problem. In many ways, we have with animal agriculture a deep cultural program of materialism, where the underlying teaching is that cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, all these animals that we're owning as property, we buy and sell them by the pound. So they're just nothing but matter. They're just matter. There's no one in there. There's just a cow. You look into her eyes, it's just a machine. You just kill her, you take her milk. The same thing with all these animals. So when we do that for 10,000 years, right? I mean, we create, every culture in our society reflects that, and we reduce ourselves. Most people in our society think of themselves as an object. And we learn to look at others as objects. And it's a terrible wound. I mean, I remember I hate to talk about it, but I remember growing up and being on the football team and the hockey team, and the locker room talk is the girls, they're objects. The girls are objects. You're supposed to use them for yourself, for your sexual, benefit, that kind of thing. This is such a deep, pervasive structure in our society to see others as instruments to be used. And there's no love in that. I mean, love is the opposite of that. Love is connecting and seeing the being. And when we see that being, then we understand the being. And there's no sense of wanting to use them or manipulate them or exploit them, it's the opposite. We want to defend and protect and honor and nurture that other being because we see them. And so we're raised in a society where if we're eating animal foods, unfortunately we're forced to see all these beings as objects, And pretty soon we see nature, we see a forest as how many board feet of lumber there. You know, we don't see the ecosystem. We see it as something we can use for ourselves. We see the rainforest. People want to protect the rainforest because there might be pharmaceuticals in there. We don't want to lose them, right? Or something. Like what about, but love understands, right? It's only through understanding and through love that we can connect with any kind of healthy way of living on this earth with each other and with animals. And animal agriculture, we have to really understand it clearly. It's the literal opposite of love. It's some people say hate. I think hate is not the opposite of love. It's just not caring at all. Like just this sort of machine-like, just disconnectedness. You know, it's the most terrifying thing. I talk about that in the World Peace Diet, to be a little mouse in the hands of a researcher who he doesn't hate you. He's not trying. He just doesn't care about your pain. Like it's just like, that's what we do with cows and pigs and chickens. It's not like we hate these cows and pigs and chickens. That's why we're going to really torture them. That's not it. It's just, we're trying to make money. We want to do it efficiently. And so the fact that they're horribly abused, it's just this numbing of our heart. It's just the shutting down of the heart of our entire society. And that's allows everything to continue, right? And so the sacred feminine is basically something that would rise up in protest against this and say, no, I love my life, I love my children, I love animals, I want to understand, that's our natural healthy being. And so in order to have this society we have now, you have to indoctrinate all the kids to having them eat animal foods. That shuts down their intelligence. It shuts down their caring. It shuts down their their spiritual and emotional sensitivity, and then they'll teach their kids the same thing. And so when people are wounded, that's the whole thing. Like as vegans, we get angry very often. We want to change people. We want to say, stop it, and then we realize if people are wounded, to get angry at them, it usually doesn't help. It usually, it is some kind of love that we can share. Another example, and try to basically embody another way of living in our way of living, and to create communities that embody that they can see and understand. So I think that's the key is this idea of understanding and loving what we're understanding, and just questioning as deeply as we can the whole technocratic approach to living, which sees ourselves as separate from nature. There's a lot of fear. I think what's underlying animal agriculture is violence, but behind that is fear. We're very afraid of nature, because our whole approach towards nature is to dominate and exploit nature. So we're not comfortable in nature, and we're not comfortable with our own silence. And we're not comfortable just to be in our own consciousness. And we're not. So that fear of nature, I think we see it playing out, in these pandemics. Like everybody's terrified of these invisible viruses, bacteria, pathogens that are around us that can harm us. And what are we? We're the same thing. We are a virus in the sense like an invisible force that harms others. Like if I go into a store and I pay for some cheese or some eggs or some fish sticks or whatever, because of that, I am now this invisible force. I've just sent an order into the system, and because of me, a cow or a hen or some animal somewhere is going to be horribly abused. And they can't see, they can't see me, the one that did it. Like I'm hidden away, and I'm far away in a store just paying for something. So I'm this invisible cause of terror and pain to another being. And so we do this over and over again. Every day, people are being an invisible cause of terror and pain to other beings. And now what do we get? I call it the boomerang effect. As you sow, so shall you reap. So we keep sowing those seeds, and now everybody's like afraid of, we're going to be attacked by this invisible force that's going to harm me and make me sick and kill me. Well, of course. And we're afraid of each other. We're afraid of nature. We're afraid of viruses. It's a very warlike. We have to have powerful guns and weapons to kill those. Everybody has to get vaccinated now because we have to kill those those terrible things off that we can't see. And to me, this is the complete opposite of love is understanding. Now, love is understanding would question this whole narrative at a very deep level, but it's hard to do. Even as vegans, it's hard to do because the levels go on and on and on. There's so many levels to this. And, I've been a vegan for 40 years and I'm just still so much more to learn in deepening what love is understanding. What does that really mean on a deep level? And how can we live our lives on this earth in harmony with animals and nature? That's really the question. And I would say that we have capacities and potentials that are far greater than we dream. I mean, we have tremendous potentials, really way beyond potentials for creating, for communicating. We use all these we're taught that we have to use technology to communicate with people far away, or to be warm enough, or to be cool enough, or whatever. But I mean, there's a lot of other capacities that we have that I think we are taught at a deep level to ignore. Our psychic abilities, for example, many other abilities that we have, that's part of the sacred feminine. And so I think when we really look deeply, we're just here for a few years on this earth, and to just question everything. I think that's, it just comes down to that, especially what I think, especially my own conclusions about the nature of reality, because there's far more to this world than we realize. I can go more into that if people are interested, but I'll stop there. Thank you. That's a great question. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Will. One thing I'd like to add to what you said is what came to me while you were speaking is this word connection. And we have lost our connection. It's not that we don't know that we're connected. We just lost the connection to nature. And the fear, we don't need to have the fear if we know we're connected to the big picture of things, and to life cycle, and to all the animals that actually they're our family. And so we've really lost the thread on our story, that is the story of our connection to creation and the Cretan mythology. And one thing I love doing now is telling stories which are about the animals that we are connected to, even here in the Northwest. Like we have a whole menagerie in our backyard. We have chipmunks and coyotes and deer, and I could go on. There are lots and lots more, and they are our friends. I mean, we keep a distance because they are wildlife, but there is a connection and an interaction, and so there's story. And I could tell you these stories and bring you into that realm of creative imagination and connection. And then there's a heart connection. And one of the things I'm going to jump around a little bit, but the other thing I was thinking about, when you don't consume the violence, so the meat that is an act of violence, your vibration changes. And as your vibration changes, then so do the way you speak, the way you act. And when I'm thinking of tribes, again, back to the native tribes, I've never heard, and I'm not saying there aren't problems, because of course there are, and we know about those issues that were imposed upon First Nations. And so there's an effect, a cause and effect that's happened. But I've never heard anyone gossip. And gossip is really an evil thing, I'm going to put it like that. It's very violent and destructive. And so there is this mutually supportive community that supports the individual in all their trials and tribulations, whether they're drunk, whether they're ill, and there isn't a gossip and a diminishing of the value of the human being. Mm-hmm. There is a supporting of it because there's connection. They are all one with each other and one with nature.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, I think you're right. These all are linked together. And the point I make in the World Peace Diet, of course, is that the essential teaching, if we're eating imprisoned animals, is don't make the connection, right? We don't want to think about what we're eating. We don't want to think about the cow or the pig or the chicken. And that's a ritual we repeat several times every day. Don't go deeply, don't think deeply, just stay shallow. And the connection, you can sum everything up with that idea, is to just reconnect with nature, with our own true nature, and then create communities where we honor the connections that we have with each other. And that only happens when we understand ourselves, I think, as beings, not just as objects, but as beings of consciousness. This idea that we're taught in school, that consciousness is just an epiphenomenon rising out of matter for some reason. You have a brain, by some random chance. It's like it strips away all of a deeper purpose in life, to reduce human beings to these just machines, that we're just biological, chemical machines trying to reproduce ourselves on this meaningless universe, on this earth. And that's great if you want to have people that are easy to control and who will buy the products that you are marketing, and who won't ask any questions, who will be very submissive, and so forth. But as soon as you have people connecting with their intuition and connecting with nature, you have people that are standing up. They stop cutting down the forest, stop messing with my kids. The sacred feminine, really stands up. And that's what I love about that idea. Mothers protecting their children, or fathers protecting their children, or the community protecting everyone. That idea, and it's something we really need to get back to, I think, again. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
Jackie, yeah.
Hi, thank you, Will, as always. I was in a group call yesterday with an indigenous social justice activist, and it was brought up about harming and animal agriculture. And we were all in consensus about that until it was about just not consuming the flesh of animal agriculture. There's humane ways. Let's support our local farmers, and proudly I'm an omnivore. So if you could help us understand how we discuss this topic when, for instance, cattle ranchers talk about how they love their animals and they find humane ways because they do love their animals, and how, especially with people that come from very strong indigenous communities that believe that it is part of the ritual and maintaining the culture and not forgetting. And so the love of the culture and the love of the tradition that's been removed and wiped from them, it's so part of something that they want to maintain. How do we have these discussions about love when those are the resistance that we're getting?
Yeah, okay, that's two different things, but that's a really good question. I think for people who are, quite honestly, I think, people who are engaging in animal agriculture in so-called sustainable ways, like free range, local, grass-fed, whatever, small scale, animal agriculture. There is this feeling, I think, that we need to do that to survive very often. If people are, only have a few acres of, whatever, a bunch of acres of land, and they want to survive, and they're survivalists, that they need to have some animals there for permaculture reasons, or to make the whole thing work so they can live. And personally, I just feel that the best way to communicate with people about this is to essentially question the underlying truth of that. And I think the more we can have examples of vegan communities or vegan as a way of living without imprisoning animals for any reason. So like where we live right now, we grow a lot of our own food. We don't grow everything, but we grow a lot. We've got about 60 fruit and nut trees and lots of berries, probably, I don't know, close to 100 berries and grapes and other bushes, and then vegetables and potatoes and all kinds of stuff. So, and it's all veganic, right? We don't use any bone meal or blood meal or manure or anything like that. We grow it all ourselves, and we do it that way. And this idea that somehow there were the good old days, when we did it small scale, and we loved our animals, I think that's not true. So however we can explain that to people without offending them, I guess. But basically, when people say they love their animals, I mean, I was I remember being a 13-year-old kid on this little farm in Vermont where he loved his cows and so forth. But I remember when the cow was only 4 years old, which is not very old for a cow. They live to be 25 years old typically. We all gathered around that cow that he loved, and we put a gun to her head and we pulled the trigger because she wasn't giving enough milk anymore because she was 4 years old, and now we got to make way for another one. So, is this love? I mean, they say they love their animals, but if I was this guy's wife, I'd say, well, do you love me, honey? I'm going to run the other way, because this kind of love is not love. I mean, it's imprisonment, it's abuse, it's killing, and it's unnecessary. There's no nutrients in these animals that I need to be healthy. So I think real love, I mean, so because your question is, how do we say this? So I think the whole idea is to just try to, create examples of other ways of living where we're not imprisoning animals. Because if people think you absolutely have to do it, then it makes it harder. And then just education of people. There is a saying, I can't remember, it was the guy that wrote the book, The Jungle. He said the hardest thing in the world is to try to get someone to understand something when their finances depend on them not understanding it, right? And so if we're talking to people who are actually engaging in animal agriculture and they're depending on that financially, it's going to be very hard, because it's like Bishop Desmond Tutu said, the hardest thing in the world is to wake up someone who's only pretending to be asleep, right? They just don't want to hear it. Right? They don't want to hear it. And, it's like, so maybe you can work with their kids, or maybe you can work with somebody else, but, it's going to be hard to get people who that's their identity to understand something. And, so unless it's like Howard Lyman and they get cancer so bad they're going to die, and then they suddenly, have some kind of an existential crisis, then maybe they'll question it. But otherwise, it's working for them. Why should they question it? They're getting paid, they're getting money. Everybody thinks they're great. Everybody loves ranchers and farmers, but just to remember that in the good old days, there were people protesting back then that, that in the medieval period when the people had their animals, they did horrible things to their animals. Geese, they would nail their feet to the floor so they wouldn't go anywhere, right? Or whatever. They would do anything to animals. I mean, it was brutal. They had bear baiting, they had bull baiting. They would set dogs on bears, on bulls to, just for entertainment and so forth. I mean, a very, very brutal system. It always has been. You go back, 2,000 years and you read Plutarch and how he was just, so emotionally distraught how people abused animals for food, and he said it's unnecessary. That was 2,000 years ago. So this is not a new issue. And if you go to any animal sanctuary, Matt and I have been to so many animal sanctuaries all over the world, and talk to them about the animals that ended up at the sanctuary, the cows or the pigs or the chickens or the turkeys or the goats or the sheep, whatever. And some of them came from factory farm operations, and very often some of them came from small little backyard operations. And you just talk to the people who run these sanctuaries about these animals, and I've heard it every single time that the animals that come from small backyard operations are just as badly treated, or even worse treated, than the ones that come from the factory farms. That they've been terribly neglected or sometimes sadistically abused, because that's what animal agriculture does. It brings out the worst in people. And you don't even want to know what goes on in families among, what goes on, what kids endure. I mean, very often kids are abused, and we don't know about it. And people say, "Oh, they seems like such a nice family. I didn't know their kids were being so abused." But it's even more like that when people have their pigs or their cows or their chickens. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes there. And the other thing is that whenever anybody's gone into any animal agriculture operation with undercover video, even if it's a small farm, they always find terrible abuse, even these small backyard operations. So so I think as animal activists, it's important to just be aware of these things, that you can't own, that's no way I can own animals. And like, as soon as I say that's my property, I mean, that's already himsa, right? It's not ahimsa, that's himsa, that's violence. So I say, I own you, these are my chickens. And it doesn't look like violence. You say, well, I'm feeding them, but it's all females, right? People say, oh, my eggs come from this woman, she loves her chickens. You have a bunch of female chickens, so there's no males around. So it's already, they're her property. She has stolen their sovereignty. They depend on her for everything. They're not living their life like they're designed to for millions of years in the jungles of Southeast Asia. There's a lot of cruelty there, but we don't see it because we're conditioned not to see it, because we are ourselves, you've probably heard me say, because we are ourselves also enslaved. See, only slaves wouldn't be able to see this. Really free people, it would be obvious. If we were really free, we would be like, it would be so obvious. But since we are ourselves, in many ways, the livestock, and we're exploited economically in every other way, and so are our children, we enslave these animals because we're also slaves. And we don't see it. We can't make the connection. The rancher who says he loves his animals or whatever, or the farmer, is in many ways being exploited. And so it's just a mirror of that. And so that's that aspect. As far as the other one, I think with the indigenous people, I mean, usually indigenous people didn't do herding of animals. I think herding of animals is somewhat different than hunting them. I mean, at least hunting, they're running around more or less, or fishing. But once we start herding them, that's where we really get into demonic abuse, really dark, horrible, owning animals and impregnating them, stealing their babies. This is Roman garden, right? This is the unpardonable sin, in a sense, or the sin that's going to create so much misery and war and so forth. But when people are hunting animals, I know there's sort of this thing like, well, they're in some kind of relationship with the animals, and there's some kind of thing going on. And so I'm personally more, if they're really on their own, out in the, it's not right here around us where they're killing wildlife all around us, which is terrible. But if this is an indigenous culture somewhere else, it's hard for me to come right out and criticize them, because I'm not part of their society. And I feel much better trying to get people in my society to transform the ways we're living, because what we're doing is destroying it for everybody. So I don't go up to Alaska and tell everybody up there they shouldn't be eating seal if they kill a seal or something like that. But there is this whole irony that if you go up there, because I've been up to Alaska, most of the people up there are eating McDonald's burgers and Coca-Cola. Everything's shipped in. And there's a lot of vegans up there too, because you can be a vegan as well. So, hopefully people will begin to gradually realize that we can live in ways that are not causing so much suffering to other living beings. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is how we tend sometimes to live in areas where it's hard to live unless you kill animals. It's just harder to survive unless you kill animals. And I notice this a lot when I go to Europe, because my wife is Swiss, and so we go up to the mountains in Switzerland, and it's, in a way, it's terrible. Like here, it's the difference. Like if you go to the mountains here in the United States, up into the Rocky Mountains, up into the Sierras, there's really very little livestock up there. There are national parks, national forests. When you get up high, we don't do livestock up there typically. It's getting a little worse under Trump, or recent administrations. But generally speaking, there wasn't livestock up there. These were considered land for the people. But in Switzerland, for example, people own that land. It's private. They own it, and they have their cows up there. You can never get away from the cows and the sheep and the goats. You can go way the heck in the middle of nowhere, and they're up there. Because the people feel like they need to live that way. They have to. If they're going to live up there, they have to they can't live up there without a cow. You just, in a way, they're right. You couldn't live up there probably without a cow. So, or a goat or something, or some goats. So my feeling is, why don't we just, don't try to live up there. leave that, let that be habitat for animals. And we live down here where we can grow our food, right? I mean, why not? We can do that. We could easily do that. And that's the beautiful thing with vegan living, is that we can feed everyone on a fraction of the land. We don't need to do animal agriculture to get food. We can feed everyone on this planet on a fraction of the land. So if we eat grains and veggies and all of that, and try to just get more and more systems in place so nobody has to kill animals for food, either hurting them or hunting them, basically. So thank you. Hope I answered that. I don't know.
Thank you so much. I just want to touch on, you mentioned the tribes again, then I'm going to call on Miles. I think where I have issues around, talking about veganism with the tribes is that Native Americans have lost their rights to everything because of colonization. We've taken their land, we've taken away their traditions, we've taken away their language, their culture, their food, natural food source. And if you get to know tribes like the Haida, first of all, there's a lot of ceremony around taking food. You don't overtake what you need. You only take what you need. You don't just feed yourself, you feed your whole community. And there's a lot of prayer and a lot of ritual around it. You fast, and you don't go with automatic weapons, or you don't, and they don't herd, you're right. So it's a very different relationship to nature. And I think that, it's a whole other conversation, but I just wanted to mention that since you brought it up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that comes to me about nonviolence is we all use single-use plastic. And that is a violence against the planet. It's choking our planet. So it's not just the food we eat, but it's what we wear,
Packaging.
dress, everything we surround ourselves with. Is it harming the planet, or is it healing the planet? And I think we really have to get into that mindset.
Right. Yeah, there's I remember watching, have you heard of Joseph Campbell, the famous mythologist? Yeah. He did years ago, I think it was in the late 1980s, he did a PBS special with Bill Moyer, and I was teaching mythology in the local college there in San Francisco Bay Area. And so I was watching it because I was teaching, I was using a lot of his material. And it was so interesting because at one point, Bill Moyer asked Joseph Campbell, talking about myths as these stories that every culture creates that helps explain the human relationship with animals, with nature, and the place, and in nature and so forth. And Bill Moyer said, "So Joseph, can you just sort of in one, just kind of give us the basic reason why is it that we human beings actually create myths? And what's the main reason that drives us always to create these stories, these myths?" And Joseph Campbell said, the one main reason that human beings create myths is to explain and justify killing animals for food. And I was so amazed when I said that, because I had never thought of it that way. But he had studied this for, in cultures all over the world, and he seems to find, that this is something that's been very hard for human beings to actually justify for ourselves to do that. So we have to have some kind of a story where the buffalo comes and says, you can have, some, and if you do it this way, or, that kind of thing. There's always these kind of contracts or some kind of a story to help kind of ease our conscience about this. But I think essentially, if we can get away from and let the animals live their lives, that'll find real another level of freedom. Okay, anyone else? Let's see. Yeah, there was somebody else, I think there was.
Yeah, we're going to call on Miles. He's had his hand up for a really long time. Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Will, for coming to this forum today. And thank you for those definitions of love. Love is understanding another. Love is seeing the being in another. And love is appreciating the divinity in another. So I have actually two questions. The first, and I'll just answer them individually in case somebody wants to interject or have a question too. The first one is related to my cognitive dissonance. So dissonance being where you were thinking one way and then evidence is presented that really
Right.
confronts you, and you think there's something wrong with my previous thinking. So in our culture, we traditionally give little boys little toy guns, you know, and not to say that it just is to little boys that might happen. It's, you know, maybe there'd be little girls too that might find guns, toy guns, interesting to play with. And then, you know, we'll graduate to giving them potentially a pellet gun. And then situation like Melissa describes, the boy shoots a raccoon gratuitously. And, you know, mea culpa, as they say. And the question I have is, you know, I recognize that sin in me, shall we call it, shall we use that word, as a boy. And I compared myself to Alan Savory, who Jamin had on this forum previously. And you no doubt know Alan Savory as a gentleman who has studied a type of animal husbandry where the animals are free to roam, encouraged to roam, and just graze. And it actually, in his view, builds soil because you keep them moving along. They're not just in a fenced compound. Anyway, he on this forum said that he killed or was responsible for a miscalculation and saying that 20,000 elephants in Africa needed to be culled. And that's what they did. But at least he had a reason, you know, or he thought he was doing it for good. Whereas, you know, myself, thinking of my action as a boy, that, you know, that I'm a bigger culprit than he is. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, well, I think
guns and our attitude and such, and Alan Savory together here.
no, I think you know, as a kid, if you killed a little bird or something with a gun, you could perhaps realize that was a bad thing to do. Hopefully, I mean, my father never allowed us to have guns, and I'm so glad. He just wasn't into hunting or anything. You know, we would go out hiking in nature, but he didn't like hunting or fishing or anything like that. So I never learned any of that from him. But I had a friend who had a gun, and he killed a little bird, I remember, and he showed me. And the neat thing was that he felt really bad about it. And I said, yeah, that's terrible what you did. I didn't, and he never did it again. And I think, you know, but when I went away to that summer camp, I remember killing my own chicken, you know, holding her down, cutting her head off, you know, that was because then we ate them, right? It was like, for food, this is what you got to do. You want to eat the chicken, you got to do it yourself. So it's kind of this coming of age, you know, ritual of being a man and killing my own chicken. And we killed the cow, you know, we killed the animals to eat them. And that was, so there was kind of a purpose there. So I think that's what justifies, that's how people justify, like Alan Savory, you know, he justifies killing animals. I mean, he's a big killer, you know, himself. I mean, not only did he kill us 20,000 elephants, but he's encouraging people to kill cows, right? He's one of the main pro-killing people on the planet in terms of killing animals, because he's encouraged, you know, he's spreading this idea that you need to have animals on the land, and then of course you got to kill them, right? You're not going to just let those animals, you know, just walk around. You got to, you know, you own them, you kill them. So I think, you know, he's serving a function to you know, in a sense, increase the sense of self-righteousness that's have in what they're doing. But I think, you know, it's so clear that animal agriculture destroys habitat and destroys these cows trample. I mean, especially the way it's done. And anyway, that's a whole long conversation. But I've read quite a bit of Alan Savory, but also the critiques of Alan Savory by Richard Oppenlander and other people. And my feeling was that he really is off base. That Oppenlander is really off base. He's really not correct in what he's saying. And people, it's like that. It's like that old saying by John McDougall. People love good news about their bad habits. You know that people. There's all these books get sold that talk about how the blood type diet. You know, if you're type O, you got to eat meat. You know, most people are type O, so everybody, oh, I tried. I can't be a vegetarian because I'm a type O. You know, I got to eat meat. You know, and Savory's kind of like that. He's kind of like this guy, Peter D'Adamo. You know, he writes a book or he gives a presentation that shows people who are eating meat that they really have to eat meat. You know, that's the only way. And Savory shows people who are eating meat or raising animals for food that this is really good for the environment. When, you know, you can see over and over again, thousands upon thousands of examples. I have this huge book called The Waste of the West. I mean, and it's how the Western United States has been completely ruined by animal agriculture, grazing of animals, and you can see it all over the place. I mean, all this, you know, what's happened. It's devastating, and there's so many examples of other people who have really brought back beautiful forests and grasslands by leaving them alone and not grazing them. And you can have some free-living animals running around like normal, but to have, you know, to use animal agriculture, because you're still killing the animals. I mean, it's not necessary. We don't need to kill them. We don't need animal flesh to be healthy, right? So, so I think, you know, that's kind of predictable that there will be this kind of pushback against veganism. You know, there's all kinds of ways that people are going to try to figure out to push back against a system that's been in place for 10,000 years, and they don't want to give up their entitlement, you know, the privilege that they have as as ones who are making money on this and who are eating the flesh of animals and who like to do it. You know, it's this privilege, basically. It's rationalizing that privilege, I think, basically. But those are great questions. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think BJ, you wanted to ask a question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Tuttle. It's good to see you and everybody. My question is right here. I think I have framed some of the conversations that I've had incorrectly after listening to you a little bit, but when I have, sometimes I would say that animal agriculture is anti-feminist, and then give examples of all the females, but then somebody would come back, well, what about the males? You know, so I'm wondering, I mean, there are a lot of males killed too. I mean, it's just vast killing. And I'm wondering if you've had that question, and if it's just that I'm framing it wrong, it's really about the divine, a way to describe the feminine in ourselves.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good question. Yeah, important question. And you're right. I mean, there's sexual abuse of males too, right? I mean, they have to get all these, where do they get all these sperm? They put in the sperm guns. You know, there's all this perversion of males, and then they're killed. So it's males and females are killed. It's just that the female is the one who gives birth to the baby. So that's what you got to really focus. That's been animal agriculture's main focus, has been impregnating these, because the more you impregnate them, the faster you do, the more babies you have, the more wealth you have, the more land you need, the more war you have to have, the more water you need. You know, you need to expand. You need, you know, so it's this domination of the female. It's really defines animal agriculture, I guess, as a way of making money and as a way of feeding people, because it's about stealing babies and impregnating and stealing the milk and so forth from these animals. And it's a mindset, you know, it's a real mindset of sexual abuse and domination. So I think, you know, the patriarchal society kind of emerges naturally, organically out of that, because it's seeing the female as a breeder, just as some, you know, not seeing her as a being, but as a breeder, just giving me what I want, basically. So I think you're right. You're on the money when you're saying that it's, you know, that animal agriculture is anti-feminist. I mean, that, you know, that it's again, or it's anti-female, or it's anti the sacred feminine. But it's also anti the sacred masculine too. You know, I think it's important to understand, which is the capacity to really be creative in a beautiful way. It also attacks that. Animal agriculture, in one word, is ugly. You know, it's just ugly. That's the main thing I would say. You know, it's aesthetically, it's hideous. Everywhere we go, we lived in an RV for 18 years, and we've been to every state, and we've seen animal agriculture and all its permutations. You know, if you go to a stockyard, a slaughterhouse, a factory farm, even the big, huge monocropped fields, I mean, everything about it, it's just ugly. It's just terror and pain and misery and killing and violence and domination and exploitation and pollution and corruption and commodification. I mean, there's nothing at all in animal agriculture that is of any redeeming quality. It's ugly, violent, abusive, unhealthy. People have some kind of idea like, well, if we just did it small scale or some other way. No, like killing and raping and stealing, and you can't do it. You know, it's like not any way to do it any other way. It's bad for everybody, for the females, for the males, for the unborn, the next generation, the past generation, every generation. There's no, and it's unnecessary. And we can figure out other ways. We can live, all the nutrients that we need to thrive and be healthy come from plants. We can get them from plants directly. We don't need to run it through an animal and eat the animal. So to just not necessarily criticize people, but just say, I think really the main way to frame it, I just have to say, I think, is as much as possible, I think, is in a positive way. So to be really careful of not criticizing people, because we're still in a tiny minority, and as soon as we come off as critical and criticizing, people just like put up a wall and they say, you self-righteous vegan, I don't have to listen to you. So to just be positive and say, gosh, I'm so glad that I discovered, that kind of thing. I'm so glad I realized. It's so grateful. I'm so grateful that someone showed me, or I read, or I learned that the only reason I was eating animal foods was because I was just following orders. I think that's a really important point. The only reason I was eating animal foods was because I was just following orders. When we say that, we plant a really powerful seed, because that's the only reason anyone eats animal foods, is because they're just following orders. And I think at a deep level, the sacred feminine wisdom in all of us doesn't want to just live life as a robot, just following orders that we all know are bad. I mean, we all know that it makes us sick and fat and unhappy, and it kills animals. I mean, people know that. So when we say, I'm so glad I realized I was just following orders, eating that food, and I'm not doing it anymore, and it's great. Just that's all you have to say, really. And you planted the seed, and they're going to start chewing on that on some level, and their own wisdom and their own inner sacred feminine will begin to water the seeds that you planted, and they'll go vegan, not because they've been shamed into it or criticized into it, but because they like, wow, I'm going to try that, and I think the more we can have them be examples of this and plant those seeds in a loving way, because that's really what veganism is. It's love for animals and for human animals. And human animals are eating animals or hunting animals because they've been wounded. They've been raised in societies where they've been forced to do this. Everybody does it, so I do it too. And so they just adopt the programming. And so if we attack them, they just hang on harder. It's like that old saying of the, there was a contest between the sun and the wind about who could make this guy, who could take away a cloak from a guy who was walking along. So this guy was walking along a road with a big cloak on, and the wind said, "Oh, I can do that. I can rip that cloak away from him, no problem." So the wind came down and just blew so hard, and the harder the wind blew, the tighter the guy hung onto his cloak, And finally, the wind just gave up. He said, I couldn't do it, And then the sun said, "Now watch me, I'll do it." And so the sun came down and started just beating, and the guy just got rid of his cloak. So I don't need that anymore. So I think, it's like the love. If we can be the loving sun rather than the wind that tries to correct the guy, then they'll realize, what am I carrying this for? It's like, it's heavy, it's toxic, it's abusive, it's unhealthy. It's, I don't need that. It's something else. They just let it go. They'd be glad to let it go. Because vegans, we can see that, it's not giving anything up to not eat animal foods, but people who aren't there, they feel like they're giving up something, they're giving up their image, they're giving up taste that they think they like and all that. So I think the more we can just couch this in terms of, it's so great I discovered this. It's so great I realized that, all these animals are being abused. I'm not contributing to that anymore. It's really great. I have more inner peace, and just plant those positive seeds and draw people to trying it out. Like it's the best party happening, it's the vegan party, basically. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we have two more hands up. So Sarah, followed by Miles.
Hello. Hi, Dr. Tuttle. Great to see you as always. Really
Thank you.
happy. Yeah, I saw you at Brittany Michelson's book release party.
Oh, great.
It was
Yes.
the last time we were able to have a big gathering, actually.
Right.
So I wanted
Right.
to talk to you about that. So what I wanted to find out is recently there have been, it seems to me, a lot of people shifting to plant-based. I wouldn't say vegan, I would say plant-based. And that's fine. I'll take anything. But my question is, with these upcoming bailouts, from what I've understood, if things go back to the way they were before, how is that going to help with, you know, because I feel like we're in the beginning of, obviously we're in the beginning of vegan world 2026, we're heading to a vegan world, but how can we progress in the vegan world when these bailouts are going to be going back to square one? Because it seems like we're making progress with these slaughterhouses shutting down because they have supposed COVID. But with these, it's kind of a two-part question. And then with this Bill Gates saying that he wants everybody to, I actually heard him last night really quickly say a clip about vaccines, how he said it's going to be about another year till a vaccine, and he was pushing vaccine. And to me, that just seems to me that he's saying, okay, we can do it the way we've always done it, but now we're just going to add a vaccine to it. And it's almost like putting a Band-Aid on a, you know, someone's heart that's exploding. So I just wanted to see what your take on that. I'm not really watching mainstream media per se, but I'm just hearing what's going on and people's conspiracy theories, this, that, and the other. But to me, it seems like we're about to take a big step backwards coming up soon. And I don't know, it's been kind of depressing me.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a good question. You know, I think like everybody right now, it's what's happening with the COVID-19 is really hard, I think, for anyone to understand all the ramifications of what's happening. It's like we're getting thrown, you know, we're being, in a sense, thrown into another dimension of reality all of a sudden, kind of abruptly. And we can't gather any more, you know, social distancing, wearing face masks, being kind of locked down, not able to leave our houses really unless we have a good reason to, that kind of thing. So I think there's, and then this idea of, you know, like you say, talking about vaccinations, mandatory vaccinations for the entire population. Bill Gates said the other day that, yeah, nothing's going to go back to normal until, you know, all 7.7 billion people are vaccinated. And so to me, that's bad news because, first of all, vaccines are definitely not vegan. So, you know, I'm not gonna get vaccinated. I mean, it's not vegan. I mean, it's a not only I tested on animals, there's animals in them. You know, I mean, there's animal tissues in them going right into my veins or arteries, and it's violent, horrible, violent thing. So I think basically with the bailouts, like you're saying, you know, that's it could be a lot of money going to these large banks and large corporations, and not a whole lot of money going to people who really need the money. So I think we're in a critical time, you know, for sure. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I mean, I always like to see silver linings. There's got to be a silver lining to the cloud. And, you know, the cloud, I guess the cloud to me, quite honestly, is that there's a lot of incentive for a powerful, wealthy elite to consolidate control over the population even more through making everybody afraid, right? A pandemic is a good way to make everybody afraid. And by doing that, they basically can shut the economy down and put the small and medium-sized businesses out of business. They'll go out of business. And people's savings will also be depleted. And so people will lose their houses. And so the houses, so there'll be a massive wealth transfer into the hands of a tiny, even more than there already is, into the hands of a tiny elite. And that could also naturally lead to martial law, because when people, if they keep this thing up longer, the economy will begin to get to the point where people are desperate for money and for food and things. So there'll be looting and so forth. So people will start begging for martial law and a police state. So if this thing continues where it's going, I think we'll see martial law and a police state. There'll be no more constitutional rights, and people will be mandatorily vaccinated. And so that's not a positive future. That's a kind of a dystopian future. And I remember when I was about 14 years old, I think probably about 55 years ago, I read, or whatever it was, a long time ago, I read 1984, and it was like, wow, what this terrible future, 1984. I read it back in the 60s, so 1984 seemed like a long way away. And I was so glad when 1984 came, and it wasn't like that, But it was a world where, everybody was exploited by a tiny elite, right? That's what happened. And so now here we are in 2020, and it looks like this is what there's a push for that in some way. And the irony is, I guess, for me, is that it's kind of like, what we've been doing, it's the boomerang effect, but what we've been doing is we've been planning for and enforcing a dystopian future on cows and pigs and chickens for generations, right? Their kids and their grandkids, and all they're gonna be born into captivity, and they're gonna be exploited. And we keep sowing those seeds, and then somehow we think, well, we shouldn't have to experience that ourselves, right? We're good, kind, loving people. We just like a good burger. We're not going to get exploited. But really, I think if you're aware, you see that more and more our freedoms are being taken away. And I think it's important really for vegans who are really skillful, pretty good at detecting hoaxes and detecting scams, because we know we've seen that eating meat, dairy, and eggs, you don't have to do it. We see that's kind of a big scam, and to check, just look at other things, be critical about what the New York Times and the CNN and CBS are saying, and Bill Gates, and try to create. I think the most important thing is to try to create communities of self-sufficiency and of sanity. I think it's more important now than ever that we become more self-reliant, either for ourselves or for a small group of people where we are, because things could really unravel. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know who knows. How it's going to unfold. I'm kind of just watching what's happening, and it seems like if people don't connect with the sacred feminine and sort of stand up and say, we want to not lose our freedoms, because freedom is really important. If we don't have the freedom to assemble, the freedom to speak, the freedom to write and say what we want, because that's what we've seen, when totalitarian regimes emerge, like they've emerged in so many countries, the vegetarian and vegan movements, they're gone, they're done. It's like, you can't say anything anymore, right? I mean, it's over. And other social justice movements they're just destroyed because we don't have freedom. So if we don't have freedom, we can't do then we're just under the thumb of a totalitarian regime. So I think we have to be very conscious of what's happening and question the deeper unfoldment of things here, and question the stories that we've been told from about everything, and just just really question. That's what I would say. I mean, we can talk more, but I don't know what other people think, but that's kind of where I'm at with the whole thing. But I've been I guess my perspective is a little different, because I'll just have to say this. I was born and raised in the media, and my father owned a chain of newspapers. And so I know in my bones that the media is nothing but lies. I know it because I sat around the table and my father said, we can't run that article because the advertisers doesn't like that article. You know, if the advertisers determine the news. And when I was a kid, it wasn't so bad. I mean, my father couldn't run an article. I mean, it was bad, but it wasn't that bad. The way it is now, you have the pharmaceutical industry pouring billions of dollars into the media on every level. I mean, they tell them what to write. They tell them what you're going to say. They tell them. So you really have to understand that they make their money from vaccines, right? They make money from sick people. They haven't made any money on me in 50 years. I have not been to a doctor or to a drugstore in 50 years. I take responsibility for my own health. I am concerned on a scale from 1 to 100. How concerned I am about the virus? 1. I'm not concerned about for me. I know because I'm healthy. I'm never going to get it. On a scale from 1 to 100, am I concerned about the government? Like 99. That's my concern. I'm not concerned at all about the virus for myself. I've traveled to China, to India, all over the world. I've given lectures. I've been hugged and photographed with hundreds of people who have runny noses and are coughing. And I don't get sick because it's like Pasteur said on his deathbed. He created the germ theory, where he said, "Oh, germs can cause disease." And then toward the end of his life, he said, "Sorry, everybody, I was wrong about that. It's not the germ, it's the terrain. It's not the germ, it's the terrain. If you have a healthy terrain, right, your body's healthy. Your germs are your friends, right? If we have 60 trillion germs inside of us, bacteria. If they all died, we would die. We have 350 trillion viruses inside of us. I mean, obviously, they're important. We need them. They're our friends. This whole idea that we have to fight against germs and viruses. I mean, our body is a lot more germs and viruses than there are of us in our body, right? So this fear to me, is completely insane. And if people would take more care for their health, and people, I mean, I just think that there's so many voices that have been repressed. You have like the top epidemiologist, one of the top epidemiologists in the entire world. This guy Knut Wissen, whatever his name was. He for 20 years he was the head of the department of epidemiology at Rockefeller University, and he was saying that the most important thing to do is stop social distancing, stop wearing masks, get immunity, and it'll be over. It'll be done with, right? I mean, that's what you got to do, because if you flatten the curve, you're going to broaden it. It's going to make people much sicker for much longer, and it's just the stupidest thing you can possibly do. Why isn't he on CNN and NBC? Because Big Pharma owns CNN and NBC. They don't want him. They want vaccines for everybody. They don't want people to get immunity, right? I mean, natural immunity. That's totally no money in that. There's no money in that, right? So, I mean, there's so many things I've been researching that show that, I mean, there's doctors are getting like literally 100% effectiveness with quinine. It's called chlorinic. It's quinine. It's from grapefruit, basically. You can make your own. You don't need a vaccine. So there's the things that are really empowering to us are not told to us. The things that make us afraid and social distance and completely destroy our freedom, that we're told all those things. Why is that? Why do you think that is? I think these are things that we just have to be aware of, and I think we should be talking about. But it's hard because there's a lot of censorship on YouTube and other places, and there's a lot of self-censorship. People are afraid to say things that go against what everybody else is saying, so everybody just goes along and acquiesces to whatever they're doing, whatever happens. But if we keep acquiescing, what's going to happen, right? I mean, that's the whole question. So I think again, we have to realize we're on this earth for a few decades to grow and learn and explore and awaken and help others. So we're now in a really challenging situation. And what's the wise thing to do? What's the real wisdom to do? And how much do we believe? What stories do we believe? I guess that's the question. And from my perspective as being born and raised in the media, I would say really don't believe the media. That's the thing. You find you maybe you can believe them, maybe, but look at who's paying. Because I got my PhD at Berkeley. I took courses in quantitative and qualitative research methodologies, and I did really well in those courses. I got A's, and I really understood. But basically, science, so-called scientific research, even is really a can of worms. You can basically prove anything if you, depending on who's funding the study and how you formulate it. Believe me, so-called science is another. And this idea of scientific consensus. I mean, science isn't about consensus. Science is supposed to be about truth. One person can be right and 99 people are wrong. And they say, well, 99% say this. Well, they may be all wrong. It's not a majority vote in science. It's not majority. It's not what the consensus says. It's like, what is actually true? What is it? You don't know. You have consensus that's bought and paid for by big corporations, and they get the media. So, that's why intuition is so important. That's why the sacred feminine is so important. That's why we have to do our own inner research and be really savvy. Don't be gullible. Don't just believe what the authorities say about things. As vegans, we've learned to do that when it comes to certain things. We have to learn to do that with more things and learn to become more self-sufficient and more guided by our inner wisdom, and less fearful of what other people think or and so forth, because if we're afraid, then we'll be a lot more easily controlled. So these are really challenging times, and I think it's really important for our children, grandchildren, to try to lay a foundation of a vegan world. And there's powerful forces in place that don't want that to happen. But I think there's also powerful evolutionary forces in humanity just awakening, just awakening out of this, like this unstoppable rise of Sophia, the sacred feminine, that we just awaken, and we have the wisdom and capacity to not be fooled by the media, and to create our own media. That's what we're doing right now. We're going to create our own media and speak as best we can, our own wisdom. That's a great question. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Will and Sarah. So Miles has his hand up again, and followed by Myra. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Tuttle. With respect to what you said, love is appreciating the divinity in another, and if God is love, then I know God. It's a psychic fact. I know God because I know that I violated the divinity in another. And Joseph Campbell was a student of Carl Jung, and I've now come to the opinion that I'm a theologian. I'm not a world-class theologian. You won't find any books on theology by me, but I'm a theologian of myself, with capital S, as Carl Jung would say. And I'm in Alberta, which is the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi people, the Blackfoot Confederacy. And one of the things I'm always cognizant of is that before we came, the settlers, the travelers, whatever we want to call ourselves, 500 years ago, they did not have the horse nor the gun, and they only took a buffalo, a bison, when they needed one, and they also ate a lot more vegetables and nuts and roots than we probably think.
Right.
So there wasn't industrial animal abuse at the time of their traditional lifestyle, which the good news is the conversation Jackie and I were part of with respect to saying, we need to stop industrial animal abuse, there was a wide consensus on that. So really we need to push to end industrial animal abuse. And for those people who think they can, have a chicken and collect the odd egg that it leaves behind for them, then fine, in a sense, we'll not argue about that, but let's really shut down the industrial animal abuse. I'm in Alberta, as I said, just south of here in High River, there's a large slaughterhouse. In Brooks, Alberta, there's a large slaughterhouse. And in those two locations, just like in South Dakota, the big slaughterhouse down there, we've got over 900 cases of COVID at these slaughterhouses.
Right.
Because
right.
they're not respecting the people, let alone the animals.
Right.
Well, just I got to get to my question. So, with respect to the divine feminine and the media, I just watched Michael Moore's latest documentary, Planet of the Humans. And at 1 hour and 8 minutes in, Vandana Shiva, or am I saying her name
Yeah,
correctly?
that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
She's the only refreshing voice, a divine feminine voice of truth. And she says, our minds have been manipulated to give power to illusions. Now, to my spiritual dissonance, I wonder if your book, The World Peace Diet, discusses Christianity, because that's where I'm in dissonance. I'm now of the opinion that when I was once thinking of myself as a Christian, I was actually, as Matthew 25 says, one of the goats. I thought I was a sheep. And now I'm of the opinion that a lot of people who think they're, in the saved category, in the sheep category, are actually the goats. And I just don't know if your book enters into any analysis of tradition, essentially the abuse, the illusions that have been created around what the virtues of Jesus Christ really are, as opposed to the illusions that I say exist today.
Okay, well, the World Peace Diet, I actually do go into that in the chapter on science and religion. I'll just say basically, the main point really is that the real core of our culture is animal agriculture, right? That's the defining fundamental principle, and unfortunately, that's demonic. So the religions that come out, that have to serve that culture, because the thing is, a religion is different from spirituality. Spirituality does not have a divided loyalty. Spirituality is about waking up, right? It's just waking up and understanding the truth that we are. Religion has got a divided loyalty. Religion is supposed to help cultivate spirituality, but it's also here to support the culture that we're in, right? A culture has a religion that supports that culture. So religion is divided, and on one hand, it's really supposed to help us evolve spiritually, but on the other hand, it's supposed to help support the cultural norms and values. And that divided loyalty, then, of course, is the big problem, because since religion, the Christian religion, the three Abrahamic religions, really, all three of them, are products of the herding culture, I think, more than other world religions. And so they all really support killing animals for food and war and the domination of the feminine. I mean, they're all sort of going along the same line. I think Jesus, it's pretty interesting that he, according to quite a few scholars that I've read their books anyway, Keith Akers and some other ones, that he was what we would call today a vegetarian or a vegan. He and his people did not eat animal foods. And so that was a major part of their religion. And it's true that the people that wrote about the early Christians, they all said that. They all agreed that they were known that they wouldn't eat any meat, right? And they wouldn't even sit with people who were eating meat. And Jesus's brother, James, was known that he would not wear any wool. They wouldn't do anything that would cause suffering to animals. That was, the thing. And when the driving out of the animals from the temple was not about the fact that they were cheating them, but because the temple was a slaughterhouse and they didn't want to see the killing. He was enraged about the killing of the animals by the priests, and that was so he was questioning that, which was going to the very core of the power structure that the priests had, which was their money and their power was through sacrificing animals. And they would have these big festivals. They were called holocausts, right? They would kill and burn a lot of animals and eat them. And so early Christianity came out as a reformation, essentially, of Judaism away from animal agriculture. There was like 5 things they would not do. They wouldn't eat meat. They wouldn't have slaves. They wouldn't go to war. They wouldn't swear oaths. They wouldn't drink alcohol. Those were things that they wouldn't do in the early days. But I think it gradually got all changed, and there were called correctores, people who would correct the texts to make them, once the Nicene the agreement at Nicaea was reached with the head of the church, and Constantine said, we'll make Christianity the religion of imperial Rome. You just have to agree on what you believe, and Jesus is the Son of God. They had to vote on that. It was like a lot of people voted against it. I guess there was a majority said yes, but anyway, they decided all these different doctrinal points. But basically, the roots of Christianity were completely washed away and lost and disappeared. And so we have sort of a religion that serves the herding culture. There's still beautiful seeds in there, but there's so many contradictions. And just the whole idea of being a shepherd, right? The Lord is my shepherd. And that idea, as I mentioned in the World Peace Diet, that's actually supposedly a comforting thought, right? Oh, the Lord is my shepherd. He'll take care of me and save me. But when you actually think a little more deeply, this is a herding culture, and the shepherd has sheep only for one reason, which is to cut their throats, right, and kill them. That's why he has them. He doesn't have them for any other reason than that. That is the reason. He's going to eat every one of them. So it's a relationship based on domination and exploitation of the sheep. And I think this deep sense of wrong that we know we have in our hearts, in our souls, of what we do to animals, we projected it out on God, right? We project it out and so we say God wants us to do this, or sacrifice the animals to Him so then we can eat them, and this whole, as Joseph Campbell said, we make our myths in order to justify our behavior, our eating animal foods. But so I think this is the real issue, and underlying everything, we have a science also, which is very similar to religion. So that's the whole point I make, is that science and religion are portrayed in our society as fighting with each other. The science says this, religion says this, they're opposites. And I say, no, they're on the same side. They're both on the same side. They're both serving the herding culture very well. So religion allows us to kill and eat animals. Science even encourages us even more to kill and eat animals in many ways. And we use scientific technology to dominate and exploit animals and so forth. The only one that both of them don't like, and both of them attack, is Sophia. Sophia, the sacred feminine. She's the one that's questioning religion. And are you really spiritual? And she's the one that's questioning science. Are you really getting anywhere towards truth? Or are you just getting towards domination and exploitation of nature? And Sophia is really the only hope we have to create a science and or a religion that are actually authentic and bring wisdom and clarity and so forth. And yet both science and religion try to dominate and remove and destroy Sophia. Both science and religion, the way they're practiced in our society, are enemies of Sophia, and they see Sophia as their enemy. And then fundamentally, because they're serving the herding culture, they're basically products of the herding culture. So the whole idea is to create somehow science and religion that are informed by Sophia. And we see this happening. Rupert Sheldrake is one example. There's examples of scientists and religious and spiritual movements that are moving towards justice and equality for animals and for all life, and questioning eating animal foods and bringing the sacred feminine in. But that's what we really, I think, we need, especially at this time, is a way to help inform our wisdom that will create a new, more relevant and more authentic science and religion. And you said something about, and I think, industrialized animal agriculture is obviously terrible, but I think just in general, as I said earlier, anytime we small scale or large scale. And the good thing, I will say, one final little thought, is that with this pandemic, we are, I think, seeing finally at least a more and more of a groundswell of understanding that animal agriculture creates these horrific conditions where bacteria and pathogens breed and create all kinds of disease and sickness, and also that it makes us more susceptible to these diseases. And so I think, there could be, one of the silver linings from this is that there could be a big, hopefully a boost in people's being willing to accept eating less meat and dairy and eggs and going away from it. Because, if people, as long as people want to eat animal foods, there's going to be these big factory farms, right? You got to have some way to, but government policy can change. It would be really important, I think, for us to push for taxing, stopping the subsidies and taxing meat, dairy products, and eggs, like we do cigarettes and alcohol, because they're so toxic. Wow, we're almost out of time. I can't believe it.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. I'm going to get your book.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Thank you so much, everyone. So we're coming up to the hour, but there are a few people who still have questions. I want to welcome John Raymer, and then Dr. Silas Rao and Dr. Priya will also be joining us for the follow-on session. So it's Myra, followed by Chad, and I think, James, you also had your hand up. So until they turn up, let's
Okay.
keep going if everyone's okay with that. Thank you, Myra.
I'm gonna try to be very brief because we know we're running out of time. Going back to the conversation with Bill Gates and the big elite of trying to bring a new world order to control humanity, I think that is I believe that is very important to know that we are in a different age. We're in a different era, which is the era of Aquarius, and it's an era of more light. And we should be very aware that we are almost not allowed to become depressed, to become mad, and to lower our energy to our stomach, to our Tantiem area. Because no matter how much, I'm gonna say how the amount of negativity or that toxic masculinity side of this humanity tries to put darkness into this world, there is still going to be light. And this is why we are here, to support each other. And if we are feeling that our emotions are down to our Tantiem area, to our stomach, then let's get together and let's support each other to bring our spirit, our elevation, and our energy up to our heart again. And this is a place of light. And I enjoy. I'm awaiting from Monday and on. I'm like, I can't wait for Friday to get here and to be connected to every one of you guys. So I think it is very important. We're not allowed, it's almost like an insult to divinity to allow ourselves to get depressed, anxiety, panic attacks. I know that we're humans and it's normal, but let's not allow ourselves to be in that dark side for a long time. And if we feel like we're being dragged, then let's reach out to each other and let's talk about it and let's meditate together and let's joke around together. So we are here to support each other. This is all I wanted to say. Love you all.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really important, and I absolutely agree. Totally. That's I should have said that maybe from the very beginning. That I would just also say though, besides getting together like we're doing now to remind each other and support each other and being positive, that we also as individuals take time every day in our own consciousness to connect with the fundamental truth that what I am was never born and will never die. That what I am, really take time to connect with the being that we are beyond all the thinking, the identification with my problems and my body and whatever we're going through here, and connect with the truth of the eternal light of consciousness, which is, in a sense, it's like the sky that can never be damaged by the clouds. The clouds that are coming are the issues of the day, but they can't damage the sky. We are the sky of eternal awareness. And to remember that and connect with that, to actually understand that, not just pretend, but really take time to connect with the mind beyond thinking. It's called meditation. But, I think a regular practice of meditation however that is with nature, creates a foundation where we may feel feelings of maybe sadness at what's happening to people or animals. But underlying that, we have a sense of peace and harmony and joy because we're doing our best to help bring a healing. We have a purpose here, and we can support others in a higher unfoldment of life. So keeping a positive connection with our true nature is critically important. Yeah, absolutely. That's the most important thing of all, for sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Chad, you had your hand up, and it looks also like Anne Marie, you waved your hand. I don't know if James still wants to comment. Chad, thank you.
There we go. My observation is, as a liberal Jew, that when we are in a hierarchical framework, like our, say, more conservative Orthodox, which are, they do some horrific things like Kappa wrote during the High Holy Days, and just horrifies us. But we have this, the difference, and we have, female rabbis, and we embrace Shekinah, our, the immanence of the divine,
right?
Very feminine to us, but we tend to have more frequently be vegan, or at least offer that option to people at our synagogues. And my observations is, when we come that more divine feminine, very collective, very egalitarian, we tend to not oppress as much, the feminine, as actually females and the animals and each other. So to me, my question is that hierarchical aspect of our societies kind of what's pushing this oppression of other people, the poor? I mean, because granted, slaughterhouses are not employed, they don't employ the rich, they're employed the oppressed. But just in general, that hierarchical society promotes that oppression of animals, because we're so easy to oppress anything that's other, or we conceive as less than. That's kind of my general thought.
Right. No, I don't think I need to add a lot to that. That's exactly right. And I think, we see, like you're saying, within more progressive religion, a more respect for the sacred feminine, and questioning human injustice as well, and questioning eating animal foods. This is the way forward, I think. And yeah, you said it very well. Yeah. Thanks. Anyone else? I think, Anne Marie.
Anne Marie, you had your hand up. Do you want to? Yeah, Anne Marie, you're on mute.
Am I? Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
You can hear me. I took it off mute. I put it in the message. I just said, why don't the governments recognize sentience in animals? If all the scientists are saying, and all the films and all the evidence proves that animals are sentient, why don't they just say they're sentient and make it illegal to slaughter them?
Well, I know it would be great, but the thing is, like, when I've talked to politicians about doing something to help animals, they always say the same thing. They always say, I can't do anything unless the people push us to do it. So we, the people, have got to push them to do that. And right now there's only 3 or 4 or 5% vegans, and 97 or whatever percent are eating animal foods. And so that's why. I mean, as long as people are eating animal foods, it's going to continue. But I think
I get that, but why can't they recognize animal sentience as a first step? I mean, the science is all telling them that all animals have sentience. How can they deny animal sentience?
Yeah, nobody denies that. I mean, that's been, that everybody agrees. That's
no. When they voted it in Parliament, in the UK Parliament, they voted that animals were not sentient. By a number of 17 people higher voted the animals weren't sentient.
Was that recently? I didn't hear about that.
In the British Parliament, yeah. British Parliament 2019.
2019, they voted? Well, I mean, the scientists got together and said that they are sentient. So that's, I guess that just goes to show politicians are are serving other
I don't
interests.
see how they can get away with that. If the evidence proves that animals, all creatures are sentient, I don't understand why all governments aren't aware and on that ground having to make it illegal.
Governments are infiltrated, they're captured basically by money, by financial and corporate interests. And so that's it. I mean, they're captured by these powerful forces. And so that's what we're talking about. So I think, that the power we have really comes from us as individuals doing the best we can at helping to raise awareness about these issues, and hopefully pushing through our example and through our education, governments as well as maybe not corporations, but eventually corporations, to make money doing something else. And it's really education. But I think the problem is people are still eating animal foods, and so people aren't going to rise up against that because they're eating animal foods. They prefer to think that the animals aren't sentient. The vast majority of people say in England, even though there's a good strong movement in England promoting veganism, but there's still a lot of people that would like to think that animals aren't really sentient. They're just eating a burger. They're just eating
a lot of people's reaction is to say, well, if it was illegal, then we wouldn't do it.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of like the idea that the government knows best, and if it wasn't healthy, then they wouldn't let it be served to us. That's very kind of infantile mentality, and animal agriculture tends to breed this kind of infantile mentality in us where we don't really question authority. Like I said, this idea of we don't make connections. When we eat animal foods, we learn to just disconnect from our natural wisdom.
Like Sailesh says, though, I believe from what I've realized this last few years is we are being farmed too.
Right. We are. That's what we can see. Yeah, that's the thing that we have to really understand that as vegans and question that whole thing. We're over time here a little bit.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Will, for joining us and bringing all of your research and wisdom and heart to us. And we're now have our new guests arriving, John Raymer, Dr. Sailesh Rao, and Dr. Priya. So welcome, and I'll pass the mic over to the patriarch. No, just kidding.
All right.
The divine feminine, Raymond Shively.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks so much, Jackie, for setting this up, and thank you for coordinating everything. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thanks, Sailesh. Welcome. I'm glad you guys and John and Priya. Thanks. Keep it going here. It's been fascinating, really.